You know that I'm a magician by trade, as a background, and as a kid.
I do know you're a magician.
Yeah.
I figured that out last week.
Yeah. Well, so, in seeing how these products are working, one of the things you have to realize is that they're designed with an asymmetry of knowledge. Just like a magician knows something about your mind and how you're going to make meaning of a situation, and they know they can manipulate that meaning making that you're doing. Technologists also have an asymmetry of information. They know something about what tends to be sticky for people that they don't know about themselves. So like if I walk into Las Vegas in a casino, one of the things they figured out is if I remove the clock from the casino, people stay a lot longer, because I'm essentially removing the reasons that as your mind is scanning around using its perceptual apparatus, it doesn't see clocks anywhere. You kind of forget, time just passes more in flow. And it turned out, someone actually pointed this out to me. I didn't realize it until a week ago. TikTok, if you open the app on an iPhone or an Android that doesn't have the notch with the uneven top, TikTok actually removes the clock as you're watching videos because they don't want you thinking about what time it is, right? And so these are the magician-like tricks on the human mind. And my co-founder, Asa Raskin from the Center for Humane Technology, he actually invented the infinite scroll, which is that instead of hitting next for a video or, clicking a button, that what if you just scroll and it just kept loading them at the bottom over and over and over again. And he invented that feature and he deeply regrets it. He estimates that it wastes several million lives per day in human time. And it's because they're removing the stopping cue, which is that cue that your mind needs in a conversation. Like if I stop talking right now and there's a space, we'll know that we can kind of switch turns. But if I keep talking and you're trying to jump in, then you won't be able to, right? So I'm doing the infinite scroll right now as I'm not letting you speak.
Well, in this particular case, I would probably eventually just butt in and speak.
Which is sometimes what our brains do when they catch up to realizing that we've been spending too long.
Right. Well, exactly. So a little bit on the magic, just to let you know, you and I were together a couple weeks ago. I can't remember exactly when it was 2 weeks ago. And you did this magic trick on me where you had this quarter in my hand and you said a story and my hand was closed and then the quarter was bent in half. And it wasn't before, and it was a real quarter, and I still have it. It's in the other room on my shelf. And I purposely don't believe that was actually magic. I purposely did not look on the internet to see an explanation for that, because in the doing of that, I would have lost some of the specialness of you cracking up at watching my reaction and me wondering how the hell did he do that?
There's a key thing there, right? Which is that the magician, when they use the asymmetry of knowledge, that they know something about your mind that you don't know about themselves, they're not using that to take all your money or to manipulate your psychology and make you anorexic or to make you vote for a different candidate or to ruin a democracy that you're a part of. They use the asymmetry of information to create a magical experience, to create entertainment. In a way, they have a fiduciary obligation to you to be entertaining you. They're operating with that asymmetry of information to help or to entertain. But contrast to that, technology companies have way more knowledge about the vulnerabilities of your mind, way more privileged information. They also know a lot more how the technology works, but they're not using it to the best benefit of your children or to the democracy to function better.
So to use an obscure Dungeons and Dragons metaphor, the tech companies are lawful evil and magicians are chaotic good.
I actually haven't played that much Dungeons and Dragons, so you'd be educating me.
But my point is you can use magic in the broader sense to change people's perception of their reality. You do it all the time with your public talks, and you use word combinations for our prehistoric brain that change how people think and perhaps behave. But you're not doing that to generate clicks or money. You're doing that to change people's hearts and minds. So magic, in the sense of changing people's perception of reality, can be a real thing and a good thing. Yes?
Yeah. Well, I think there's this other trend that, if you think about a timeline of any intelligent species, if it gets to a sufficient level of intelligence, it starts to use its intelligence to understand itself. A lion doesn't have a capacity to point its own, intelligence capacities to figure out how do lion brains work and then become self-aware of, man, why do I like gazelles? And why do I like gazelles that look like that and not this? They can't interrogate their own mind. What's unique about humans in our intelligence is that we can actually build tools and build instruments and then actually become self-aware. Well, first, we don't need tools. We can actually just do like what the Buddhists did, where we just sit with our minds and we can study how we really work. We can notice that we have something called loss aversion, that it, gaining $100 doesn't feel as good as not losing $100 feels bad. And that's for an evolutionary reason, but we can discover facts like that about the human mind. And that's what magicians have done, right? They've discovered these ancient facts about how minds make meaning and biases that we have. And you can think of a timeline that, from Edward Bernays and Sigmund Freud discovering some basic things about human minds to developing marketing and focus groups to then the magicians coming along and figuring out how magic works, and then figuring out Frank Luntz and Drew Weston and people like this who know how language can shape thoughts and minds. Then you can figure out the pickup artist community and then cults. And then you can think about this increasing trajectory of self-knowledge about the predictability of human, social, animals' behavior if you control the environment and the situation. And that is like this sort of body of knowledge, which is how to turn the creativity and free will of human beings into predictable dead slabs of human behavior, because there's an asymmetry where you can cause things to happen.
This is why I lost sleep after I met you, because I realized that me just college professor reality 101 trying to do a wide boundary comprehensive library treatment of the human predicament on energy, human behavior, climate, biodiversity, money, economic growth, the future isn't what you just described. It's relevant, but it's boring and dry and not going to be able to capture people with language, et cetera. So I really struggle with, should I just discard all the science other than what it informs in my head and use PR and tricks to change people's behavior? And that's not who I am. So I'm doing these educational videos and using some art and music and such. But it's really depressing to me that unless we change how people get information and have a discourse together in society, that these larger issues aren't going to be solved. Right?
Well, I think that we can make some distinctions that, this knowledge about how human minds work doesn't mean we can inform the people who are communicating the most important things to the world and then wrap around it this efficacy program, this to communicate even more powerfully things that people need to know. But of course, this ability to persuade minds, if you think about that's what it is, it's this ability to persuade minds. That's what's going up on a curve. And you can use that for good and for bad. Frank Luntz, the Republican pollster, famously used these focus groups to come up with phrases like death panels in the salesmanship of Obamacare, right? So instead of the Affordable Care Act is helping people, they're going to have death panels that are going to decide whether you're going to live or die, right? That was a powerful phrase.
Yeah.
Or,
Yeah, and I disagree with him, and I don't know a lot about that issue, but just you framing it that way, I feel an aversion to whatever he was describing.
Right, but he was finding, and that's what the point is, that these are values neutral. There's a values neutral capacity here that can be used for many different purposes. And he also discovered that the phrase climate change was less alarming than the phrase global warming, because the climate's always changing, and so it's a neutral statement, and it's this grand irony of history that the left in the United States ended up adopting, and the environmental movement ended up adopting the phrase climate change, which is one of the least effective phrases you could use.
Yeah, it's a euphemism. Where did that name come from? I don't even know. From Frank Luntz?
I don't believe that he invented it. And by the way, he regrets all this and has been trying to work to improve climate communication. And someone that I know, and he's actually been trying to do as much as he can to kind of help use the tools that he's had to help reverse polarization and reverse climate change and things like this. But, I think he didn't invent the phrase. I think he just discovered that it was the phrase that polled in the way that it did. But, across the board, I've studied this, and there's people like Lara Borditsky, who we actually had on our podcast. We have a podcast called Your Undivided Attention, and we interviewed her about the power of language. And people don't know that, if you talk about a pre-owned car, people like the idea of buying a pre-owned car. But if you talk about a used car, no one wants a used car, right? And there's just all these games. George Lakoff at Berkeley will talk about this ad nauseum. He wrote a famous book called Metaphors We Live By, where if you frame the nation, for example, as a family, Mother Russia, we don't want those missiles in our backyard. We don't send our sons and daughters to war. In each of these phrases that I'm mentioning, we're invoking the nation as not just a nation. We're talking about the nation as a family member, as a parent, right? The backyard of our country, the mother Russia, the father Russia. These are all ways that we manipulate culture into believing in ideas like a nation, which are abstract. They're totally fictions.
Do all these language tricks or leanings that you just said have their core roots in evolutionary psychology, that they're honing in on an impulse that was conserved over evolutionary time that was important to us?
Well, I mean, take that one, nation as a family, right? So the family is going to be pretty core in terms of the human experience. Over time, people are going to have mothers and fathers, and they tend to use the same basic ma for mother and da for father. Vaguely that direction, right? And then I think the clever political usage here is to link concepts that you want to be associated according to that childhood-like experience, that childhood-like loyalty and warmth that you get from a mother, to say Mother Russia. When you link these things together, you can start constructing reality. Some people call it ontological design. But this is just giving people a taste. I mean, I think we can get more into the tech topics. Mm-hmm. The important thing to establish here is that the mind can be persuaded. Everyone is persuadable. It's not just that because you and I are here and our listeners are listening to this, that only us, three of us, that you, the listener, and the two of us, Nate and I, are the smart ones. And it's only those dumb people way over there that are manipulated by propaganda. You have to see that you're not ever not using language. You're always using language. And when you use language, you're casting spells that create a framework for seeing reality. And we just have to be aware of this, because increasingly there are actors that are better and better at knowing which language to use to get us to feel or believe one way or the other. And then you link this with the tech equation, and technology is getting better and better at reinforcing certain language patterns over and over again.
I just hired a coach to help me with various efforts with my organization. And one thing she said off the bat was that the language I use to describe our situation is too negative. And I say the problem. And instead, I should say the challenge or the opportunity. Mm-hmm. And the facts are all the same, but the language that I use tends to be too negative, because I'm freaking terrified about what's coming. So naturally, I have negative sounding words. But I think another issue that I learned recently is that if you're a certain personality type, or if you're a certain temperament, or if you're a certain Myers-Briggs type, the fact that other people think differently isn't the issue. The issue is that we naturally assume that other people think like we do, and that we're the same personality types. And
there's a name for that in psychology. I forgot the name right now. We overestimate the number of people who share our beliefs. And if you think about it, evolutionarily speaking, you would expect that people who you meet in your tribe are likely to vaguely have the same notion and construction of reality as us. And so we wouldn't evolutionarily be evolved to think about how different every reality would be for everyone else around us.